18 months, Stryker paid 4.9 billion for Inari, and Boston Scientific made a huge move on Penumbra. Both of those deals were driven by the exact market you're playing in right now. Talk to me, what's going on?
Well, I think it's a super exciting time in the thrombectomy space, and specifically around pulmonary embolism, where we're focused, but also VTE or venous thromboembolism with mechanical thrombectomy in general. This is a space where the momentum has been building since about 2019, when Inari really started to kick off a lot of the demonstration that using a catheter to remove a clot in the pulmonary arteries, raising awareness that this is the third leading cause of cardiovascular death, and really demonstrating to the community, a small group of community, and then a larger group, and then Penumbra joining in, that this was a really great therapy for patients. Physicians caught on, hospitals understood that it was helping alleviate the stress in the intensive care unit, and just in general, this momentum of the market, and proving that this market not only was a real one, but that had legs, right? And is going to continue to grow over time. We've also seen the readout of some large clinical trials that both Inari and Penumbra ran, randomized clinical trials that are helping the guidelines change and helping us see broader adoption and capture some of those physicians that have on the sidelines waiting for randomized data, which is perfectly legitimate, right? If you're a more conservative physician, you want to see that kind of evidence before you take up the technology. So as that kind of dynamic happened, ultimately, Stryker ended up buying Inari. It was not the only company that bid for Inari, right? There were several strategics that tried to buy Inari at the same time. So that was a competitive process, and Stryker happened to be the one that won, but it was real validation, right, of a large strategic saying, "We believe that this is the future, a major future kind of vertical in the peripheral treatment area." And then, I think we saw, what was it, about a year and just a bit later, Boston Scientific come in, and, they're in the process, the deal hasn't closed, but it will close, of buying Penumbra, which we have to admit is not 100% about VTE. There is a part of that that's about neurovascular. I mean, it's a really big part of an embolization. Those are pretty big parts of Penumbra, but nonetheless, thrombectomy is a huge growth area for Penumbra. And so we now see the strategic saying, look, this space is gonna grow. Pulmonary embolism itself is about $650 million in sales right now, growing at 20%, foreseen to continue to grow at 20%, maybe 20% penetrated, between 15 and 20% penetrated of all the patients that could be treated. So, yeah, it's real validation, and it couldn't be any hotter, really, in terms of an area of strategic focus.
Well, we'll definitely catch up on that later because there's quite a bit I want to talk to you about on that stage. Let's talk about you then. I'd like to talk a little bit how you got into the market. It wasn't a traditional entrance into the market. I don't think you ever planned to be in medical devices, if that's correct.
That's true. I kind of ended up in medical devices in a roundabout way. I finished business school in Virginia and wanted to go to work in Europe. I mean, there was just a decision I made that that would be exciting for me to have that as an experience and next phase of my life. And ultimately ended up getting a job with an early stage venture capital group in London that happened to be focused on medtech. So, it wasn't something I set out to be in med tech, but that's what they were doing, so that's what I started doing, and
And here you are, somewhat 25 years later. At what stage do you feel now medtech stopped being a job and started being a bit of a mission then?
I think when I was at Medtronic, that's when, because I after that experience and co-founding a early stage startup in the diabetes space for continuous glucose monitoring, which failed pretty quickly, which was also a great experience to have. I mean, everybody should have one of those. If you haven't tried and failed, you're not playing the game hard enough. But, I ended up going to work for Medtronic at the European headquarters, and, I mean, Medtronic has a real mission traditionally around medtech and being inside a large organization where there's nothing else but technology and the patient. And, having that over about 9 years in various positions, various geographies, really soaking up the mentality of medtech, I would say, and really trying to honor from then on, in Medtronic or out, honoring that mission, right? Of, when we are doing things in service to better outcomes for patients, we're doing the right thing. And that means some hard decisions sometimes, but ultimately, they end up being the right decisions, and they play out successfully over time, right?
I want to touch on that. So, you can learn different kind of different kind of lessons from startups than you will do in blue chips. And what did you find was the toughest lessons that you learned at both of these? So, in your co-founded diabetes company, and then stepping into a company like Medtronic, you must have learned some tough lessons on the way.
Yeah, I mean, there've been a lot of lessons. I think, you learn a lot about yourself and where you fit, and the amount of autonomy you're seeking, the amount of impact you wanna have for yourself, or visible impact you wanna see for yourself. I mean, there was a lesson when I left Medtronic, and I thought, "Oh," of course I thought, "Oh, well," because they kind of erased my position. I was like, "Oh, like, this is how is anything gonna happen?" Like, "How are things gonna get done if my role isn't there and I'm not there?" And, of course, like, everything just continues, right? That's a silly thing to think because it's a huge organization with giant momentum. But you step into a startup, and especially a smaller one with 5, 10, 15, even 40 people, right? Somebody doesn't show up for work, or somebody isn't there, right? Or you don't make the decision fast enough, right? There are real ramifications. And it's a smaller kind of playing field in a way, but a much more a meaningful one in terms of your impact on what's happening, and the trajectory of what can become like a really important therapy, right? Because if you're not working on something that really could replace the standard of care, then I mean, okay, you might make a little money on the side, but that's what the mission of startups really is, right? Is to bring something completely new. Big companies do a pretty good job of iterating. So that was a one lesson for me. And I think I've learned other lessons around just where certain personalities fit in, and wanting to drive things, wanting to, not being, how would you say, tolerant of, kind of, just we're gonna keep doing this because that's the political powers have decided to keep doing it this way, and the organization wants to decide to keep doing it this way. In a startup, you have the autonomy to say, "This isn't working, let's do it this way," and to pivot quite quickly, and I find that I incredibly enabling and pleasurable, in fact, to, like, not get stuck, just keep doing the same thing when you think, "Oh, this isn't probably the right methodology."
Well, that makes sense to me then, because like I'm looking at your background right now on the other screen then. So if you're talking about having that more say into it, and challenging this status quo, right? You left Medtronic, which is a big safety blanket, or your position was eliminated. You then went to Direct Flow, and then you then also went to, oh no, other way around. You went to Sequana and to Direct Flow. Each one is getting smaller and riskier. So I feel that you was slowly, realizing just how much impact and how much say that you can have in a startup. Is that correct?
Well, Sequana and was pretty small at that time, probably 15 or 20 people, so not a large organization. I did learn very quickly, the wake up that you get in a startup, which is that when you wanna go meet with doctors, when you wanna, like, engage, not having that Medtronic or Boston Scientific or Abbott card and just being some random startup person, it's harder to get in front of people. They don't listen as much, right? You don't have the you have to, like, do it all yourself, and that's a very real thing that you have to grapple with. I often think of, like, big med tech and startups as being like American football and rugby, like, both are physical, both value strength and speed, etc. But a great American football player doesn't necessarily make a great rugby player, and a great rugby player does not make a great American football player. And so you've got to respect that it's a different game fundamentally. And some of the habits and some of the skill sets that you made you good at one don't necessarily make you good at another.
So, Dan, you were Limbflow's first employee, building a therapy for patients who, by definition, had pretty much no options, to be quite honest. How did you feel stepping into that business, and what was the mission there when you landed?
Well, that was a really interesting moment, and there were some aspects to it that were hard, and some aspects to it that were advantageous. I was stepping into a project that had been really built up by Dr. Martin Rothman and Tim Linehan, who was kind of running it as CEO there, but he's a founder and working as part of MD Start, kind of creating the company and then spinning it out, and a physician named Stephen Coombe who had helped us do the first in man. And so there were maybe 5, 7 people working on the project at that point, but there was no full-time employee and there was no real, I mean, well, Tim was performing the role of the CEO, but there was no one there full-time who was going to really build it out. So that was a great opportunity for me to come in and, kind of start to build out the talent that would live and breathe Limbflow over the next 7 years, and to really, focus the mission on building the internal capabilities that we would need to execute a US clinical trial, for example, to build out the technology portfolio and innovate it, which we needed to do. Uh, so lots of hard stuff to do, especially in a space where the patient population with this no option patient population was not well understood. The regulatory authorities didn't really understand what we were on about in terms of trial design and endpoints and the particular aspects of this late stage patient group that is going to lose their limb effectively and then likely to lose their life if that happens. And using turning veins into arteries or making them perform like arteries to deliver oxygenated blood, these were all big things, big concepts that we had to grapple with and ultimately convert people to believe seeing things the way we saw them. So that was really what a lot of the work that had to be done. The advantage I had was I started right as we closed the Series B. So we had 15 million euros to work with, and I had about 18 months or 2 years to get used to being CEO. And this is pretty different than often what you get as your first CEO job, which is company is almost out of money. We need to raise money. Things aren't working. Please come in and take over from someone else. And I tell you, if you haven't been CEO before, trying to learn how to perform that particular function, learn how to raise money and fix whatever problem they have is really, really hard. And so not having to spend 80% or 50% of my time, whatever it may be, trying to just fill up the coffers so we can do our work was a huge advantage for me in the beginning. And then I had to go out raise the C and the D, and then we sold the company right when we raised the E. So, yeah, that it was an adventure from the whole time. In fact.
I want to ask you about something that you touched upon, and how hard is it to commercialize a therapy or a product where you're ultimately asking doctors to kind of unlearn a way of thinking and to do stuff like doctors are hard guys to convince.
I think it's very hard, to be honest, and it requires. It certainly isn't something. At least with a thing like Limbflow, if you're trying to get them to do a completely different procedure with, even though it relies on normal catheter, peripheral catheter techniques, but using anatomy that is unfamiliar. No one really works in the pedal veins. No one is doing foot punctures into the pedal veins. There are a lot of aspects. Seeing how you treat veins in there as they mature into arteries, or at least performing like arteries, these things were unfamiliar. And also one thing with Limbflow was that we had to train people to really pay attention to the foot, which always for us had a wound, potentially had gangrene, like really nasty end stage feet. And a lot of physicians doing peripheral intervention are interventional cardiologists, interventional radiologists. They are not trained to treat foot wounds, right? Vascular surgeons, yes, but you've got a lot of these physicians who that's a completely new area of medicine almost for them to engage in. So there's a lot of education, a lot of clinical support, a lot of market building, if you think about it that way, that has to take place. You can't just walk in and be like, "Hey, look at this data, it works. We can, this will be fine." It absolutely not the case. So it's about building KOLs, deep partnership, deep clinical training, a lot of data, a lot of education, but you can certainly make it successful if you're willing to do the work.
Okay, very, very nice, and there's some good advice there. There's some great lessons there. I think there was already a few insights that we can be sharing with people afterwards. What happened afterwards? Then I believe you stayed on as an advisor for Inari. Is that correct for the Limbflow integration?
I mean, for a bit, it was pretty clear. I mean, Drew communicated with me right as the week before the deal closed, that they had selected someone to run the Limbflow business inside Inari, which I thought was entirely appropriate. And who was deeply trusted by the senior leadership team, had been part of the Inari journey from the beginning, and could kind of guide the integration with the whole Inari system, as Limbflow became part of that organization. And so I helped out, and but what happens is that you help out for a while, and then pretty quickly they get a handle on it, and they're just calling you sometimes if there's some specific issue. So I had a pretty quick phase out there. Of course, I remained tremendously supportive of the business, and was ready to do. But they had, great people who knew what they were doing, and a lot of market development history there. So they understood what we were trying to accomplish, and really took on the mission, as it were, just inside the big purple organization. So and CEOs like to be CEOs. We don't like to be employees anymore. We get, I would say, we're not housebroken, and like we like to go do what we want to do, and we want to have autonomy, and we want to have our say, and we want to, kind of it's hard, at least for me, to kind of suddenly sit inside a completely different organization for long periods of time. But if it needs to happen for the success of the business, I'm going to do it, right? For sure.
Perfect. And let's fast forward a few months then. So that's when you became the CEO of E2 back in August 2024. What have you been building so far, and how's things looking?
Oh, it's been fantastic. It was not the most obvious choice for me. I mean, when I left Limbflow, I was not sure if I ever wanted to be CEO again. It's you go through kind of an emotional dip, and or at least I did, and I talking to other CEOs who've had exits, have a similar feeling of like, I would imagine it's like these guys that walk off from winning the World Cup or whatever, and suddenly you've been under all this pressure, you've had so much excitement, so much intensity, and suddenly it's nothing, right? And you think, "Oh, am I really willing to go back and, like, start again and build it from the beginning?" But I made a decision. One, I didn't wanna just be a CEO. I also wanted to see if I could sit on some boards and potentially be chairman of some companies, because I didn't wanna just concentrate on one thing. And so that was part of my process of identifying a couple different companies, and becoming chairman of those companies, here in Europe. And then I was approached to about the E2 opportunity that was looking to really move out of, um, the almost the incubation phase, or the late incubation phase, with some clinical data, get their clinical trial done, really step up the innovation effort, bring a fair amount of capital into the company, which is something I'm decently good at, and then get ready for commercialization, which I have a long history in commercialization. So I took a look at it, and I mean, I knew the market they were in, because I tracked Inari for so long. I knew it was a great market. And so what I didn't know was whether it was great technology and great people. And so it actually took about 3 months to get comfortable with the people and the technology, both of which I came away with saying, like, this is awesome. I can this is a foundation that we can build from. It's very differentiated. It's just a fantastic technology that tackles exactly what physicians are asking for as the next generation of technologies in the treatment of pulmonary embolism. And and I just generally had a lot of fun and liked the personalities, right?
What do you think it was that hooked you? It sounds like you was very selective over where you was going next, but there must have been a key moment where it pivoted and you was like, "Yeah, I'm going for this."
There were like 2 days I flew out to California, and one I was so Mike Rosenthal had really, been there as a founder and built the technology until this point, and then, but was still involved with his incubator and ventures, which has done some fantastic projects. And he was CEO, I was coming in to take over as CEO, and he is stepping into the COO role. So one thing was to make sure that he and I could really work together because I wanted him to stay. And so that's a really like, it's really getting to know each other, really understanding, can you trust each other? And we had a breakfast where it was like we both looked at each other like, are we gonna do this? Like, can we, you know, it's like a come to Jesus moment, like, are we really gonna do this together? Like, and we decided yes. And at the same time, my other piece of it was I got my hands on the technology in a flow model. And it wasn't just an idea. And I saw how amazing the technology was from a navigation point of view, how you could capture clot very, very quickly, the low profile, intuitive design. I just like, oh, I've seen the Inari technology, I've seen the Penumbra technology. I know this is differentiated and this can be just an incredible success. So
I want to take a minute to say thank you to our sponsors, TTP. TTP is a leader in complex medical device development. With deep scientific and engineering expertise, they help medtech teams crack tough development challenges and make the right calls early, reducing rework, delays, and uncertainty later on. Whether you're navigating uncharted technical territory or racing towards market, TTP brings clarity and real-world judgment to the decisions that shape performance, usability, and manufacturability. By retiring risk early and grounding innovation in real-world constraints, they help you move forward with speed and confidence. To find out more, check out the show notes.
And let's talk about that. You mentioned that you've actually just started on a really good point there. So, pulmonary embolism is the third leading cause of cardiovascular death. Yet, mechanical thrombectomy is still pretty young in the market. Inari and Penumbra have done that market development. There is advantages arriving second, and there is disadvantages as well. What do you think are the biggest advantages are right now?
of arriving in the set in kind of
Yeah.
as the sec because there are two incumbents now, Inari
Yep.
and Penumbra, or I mean Stryker and Penumbra. Sorry, I say
Yeah.
Inari,
Yeah.
but the Stryker peripheral business. Sorry, with that technology, and I mean, the advantages are that, those platforms are relatively stable platforms with really incremental innovation. And if you see, they're getting a little better over time, but they're missing the combination of components and features that we know physicians want. And we believe they wanted them for a long time. When we just raised our Series D, one of the investors, Norwest, as they were analyzing us and the market, actually went out and without us knowing, asked 100 physicians through a market research firm um, what they're looking for in terms of the ideal device for the treatment of pulmonary embolism and what will make them change and change how they're doing things today. And the message was very clear. They said efficacy, all the devices pull clot, they work pretty well. That's not the issue. It's about low profile procedural efficiency and blood return. Okay. And I mean, they want a little small to intermediate profile device. That I mean, that's just I call it like Newton's fourth law of medical devices, right? We always efficacy is relatively similar, and often in medical devices, it's difficult to prove superiority in efficacy, and certainly with the endpoints we have in pulmonary embolism, very difficult. That's why you don't see head-to-head trials. So if that's kind of constant, we are always going to look to lower profile, faster, safer, greater procedural efficiency. These are the things that always happen. We are all I mean, look at Boston buying or investing in the new transcatheter, TAVI device
Yeah.
that they did just recently, 1.5 billion.
Was that
One of the reasons is
Myrus?
it's got an 8 French sheath, right?
Wow.
Now the device is not really smaller than the other devices, but it's got a small sheath. That's a big part of the draw. Anytime we can drop the sheath size, anytime we can drop the size of the device, that's huge for physicians. So building a smaller device that performs like a big device, that's important. Being highly maneuverable, reducing the number of passes, the times you put the device in and out of the heart, and the clogging that causes those passes, is a key thing they want to get rid of. They want, clearly, they want blood return, because what is fundamental to aspiration and pulling out clot is you're pulling out blood. You hope the clot is in the blood you pull out, but you're definitely pulling out blood. And some of these patients have a ton of clot and can be very difficult. And what that means is there's a subset of them, you can call it 25% or whatever, that you end up working a lot on. And it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of blood taken out to get them to where they're not going to need to go to the ICU, where they're going to be saved, as it were, from their pulmonary embolism. And the ability to return blood, do it efficiently, and do it with blood that you can prove is of good quality, is something physicians very clearly want. And essentially, this is what E2, is planning to commercialize. So, is a device that is 16 French, but pulls clot like a large device, right? Is a single pass device, and we've demonstrated that in clinical trials, and has an efficient and safe blood return system. So, and we really think we're the only system that has that, and it's going to be very difficult to reproduce the suite of technologies that were put into this device.
Well, it sounds like it's promising large bore performance for a small profile catheter, right? So I can imagine, physicians are going to be very excited about this. There's also going to be a sense of people being skeptical about it. How do you convince them, or even, take them on that journey to show them what you're building?
Well, I mean, just like with me, when I got my hands in the flow model, I can tell you that it is a visceral response from physicians when they get their hands in a flow model. We build our own clots at E2. We don't use fake clot, right? We don't use FLARP. We actually build our own bovine blood clots, very fibrous, huge clots, and we're able right then to have them put in a flow model that's, just like the heart or the pulmonary arteries, and they're able to navigate easily in a very intuitive way. They're able to pull large clots out very efficiently, and they can also see the blood return system, and they just see how everything's integrated. It's easy to remember. You don't need a lot of reminding. All you have is a catheter and the blood return system. You don't have multiple catheters to use. You're not swapping out things. You're not swapping out wires multiple times during the procedures. We averaged 1.1 passes per procedure, meaning it went in once and came out once. We're never going to get below 1, and no one's got anywhere close to 1.1 passes. So it really is in the physicality. And physicians, remember, while, interventional physicians, they live and breathe through their hands and the experience of interacting with the anatomy through devices, and they are great judges of what is going to enable them to be faster, have an easier procedure, have a more predictable procedure, and feel more in control of what's going on. One, because they're not nervous about a huge catheter across the heart, and two, because they can see what's happening and they can put the blood back in whenever they want. We had an average blood return in our trial of 10, I mean, average blood loss in our trial of 10 mLs.
Bro.
10 mLs, almost nothing. No one's got anywhere near that as well. So but it's really about a suite of technologies that we've innovated off.
And you guys have just moved into another exciting stage. You've just had a oversubscribed Series C, which I also think was proactively initiated by an investor, right? Um, you know, this fundraising market at the moment is tough. A lot of people out there are struggling to do so. What do you think it is ultimately about E2 that's doing the opposite? It's actually bringing in investment. People proactively want to work with you guys and get this to market.
Well, I'd love to say that we're like super geniuses and just awesome at what we do, but there are some factors that that drew investors in, and there's also a factor of the phase we're at, right? So one, I mean, you see it with Penumbra and you see it with Inari. It's a hot space, right? And VCs love hot spaces because acquisitions tend to happen repeatedly in hot spaces. You're seeing it in IVL right now, people chasing Shockwave, right? We've had multiple acquisitions. We will see more in IVL. So this is a space where we're already seeing 2 acquisitions. We're likely to see more. So one, because venture capitalists, they don't give you money. They invest money so they can get multiples of that money back. So fundamentally, this is a great market. The group that approached us proactively was Gilda Healthcare, who was the #1 investor in Inari and had been on the Inari board until the sale of Inari to Stryker. So they had intimate knowledge of the market, right? They had seen it develop over time. They believed that there was room for a lot of innovation in the future, and they believe this market would continue to grow. They looked at all the technologies and they said, we think E2 is the one that has the differentiated technology for the future out of all the different companies that are bringing innovation into the market. We sat down because I've known them, from raising other funds. I've interacted with them multiple times before. I know them quite well, and they said, "Dan, are you interested in us looking at diligence to do a term sheet?" And I said, "Hey, look, we're not ready to raise our round. But and the board hasn't signed off on raising the round, but let's start. And if you guys are satisfied, if you go through, you give us a term sheet, we're certainly going to look at it. In the meantime, these are incredibly smart investors who know the area intimately, as I mentioned. So they're asking us questions that if we can't answer, we better find an answer because they are, we're not educating them about the market, which is often what's happening when you're pitching. They were educating us about the market. So, and this is ideal. I mean, what a great interaction. And when you're working with people who are super collaborative, I mean, really loved that phase of it, the second half of last year. And then they wrote us a term sheet. We negotiated it further, ultimately signed it. We looked at a few other firms for filling out the round, and brought in Norvest very quickly after they did their work, as mentioned. And we were massively oversubscribed internally. The currents wanted to put more money in, and we had a strategic who came and wanted to put more money in, and we had to kind of squeeze everyone in because we capped it at 80. Because we just didn't want to take more money at this time. So yeah, it was quite a process, but again, driven by this is a hot space, and being in a hot space helps. You gotta have great technology in a hot space. Gilda didn't go to anybody else; they came to us, right? But it is a combination of factors, I would say.
I think
Oh, and
one
and and we're awesome. I
and
forgot to
you're
say.
awesome, and yeah,
And
you
at
did
the
you
end of
did
the day, of course, my team is awesome. We're amazing. So
shout out to the E2 team right there.
yes.
You mentioned something that's really important as well, and I didn't realize how important it was until the last few years where I've had more in-depth discussions about fundraising, and it was getting in bed with the right people. These investors, not all of them are great, and it sounds like you've been selective and you've ended up with some really good ones. What would you advise other CEOs that aren't in that position where they're having to sort of fight for term sheets and really drive engagement? What should they be looking for in an investor that's gonna, really level them up as a business?
Well, fundamentally, you look for someone who's willing to write a term sheet.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where that's where it
It's a
starts.
good
But
start.
I mean, you have to keep the company alive. You have to
Yep.
take money, and and it changes. The people you're dealing with often at Series A and Series B are sometimes a little bit different than you deal with at Series C and D, where they're super professionalized, large organizations with tremendous amount of advisors and capabilities doing diligence behind them. You know, Dealing with that kind of investor is different from an earlier stage investor who is going to be more idiosyncratic, may have varying levels of knowledge about the space. and may just have a lot of personality associated with them. Now, luckily, our Series A investor was Sante Ventures, which really founded the company. And Sante is, I mean, just incredible. Really works well with entrepreneurs and founders, and is able to follow through the life cycle of the business. So, and they have a lot of resource because they've raised some pretty substantial funds. I think it's really challenging sometimes when you're trying to educate an investor about your marketplace, and they just don't have a huge background, and they don't have a lot of their own advisors that they rely on to reassure them, and you're having to introduce them to people familiar in the space, because it's different when they're able to go to people they've worked with forever and say, "Hey, is this really a good thing to do?" And those people are like, "Yeah." Whereas, say it's a company that's never invested in ophthalmology, and they're looking at ophthalmology thing, and they've got to, like, it's just kind of unknown territory. Just as I would be uncomfortable being CEO of a company in a space that I didn't know anything about, because there's I mean, all of these different spaces are different. We are very tribal in med tech. Cardiovascular people kind of stick with cardiovascular things, orthopedics people, ENT people. So you can switch, but there's a big learning curve. And so I think you have to just work with what you've got, and especially at the earlier stages, you just have to put extra grit and effort, but to bring people up to speed, because they're just not going to come with a huge history. And you know, I mean, someone like Gilda has looked at, 20 or 30 heart failure startups, right? Like, they are, you want to talk heart failure, like they're going to have a huge background that you don't even have, right? Whereas a earlier stage group might have looked at 2 or 3, right? And so I think it's just a difference of experience and deal flow, really, in a way.
Yeah,
Um,
learn how to turn some heads and show them. It sounds like is an important lesson from that. And before we move on to some important lessons that I want to close with, ultimately, I'm also excited to hear about what's next for you guys. You've just raised substantial funds. What does the next couple of years like look for you?
Well, we're looking forward to taking the product to market. That's what we're getting ourselves ready for, and getting the resources ready, getting the various aspects that one does to prepare for that. And ultimately demonstrating for our investors and to the market that this is going to be the next great technology in pulmonary embolism. And you do that through having great outcomes with patients, fundamentally, right? I mean, it's great outcomes from patients experienced by the physicians that have easy, straightforward, efficient procedures that will drive adoption, right? And that ultimately will demonstrate that this is the technology that should be successful, because we have two futures, right? One is ultimately an acquisition where some strategic needs to say, we want to have this and we believe it is the next big thing, or we're convincing the public markets, right? That we're the next big thing. So, and I can't tell you which one is going to be those, but I know both of them, we need a lot of evidence that we're having great outcomes from patients, and doctors are really happy to use it, and they want to use it more. I mean, it's not more complicated than that, fundamentally.
Well, best of luck to you guys. I think you've got not only an exciting product beneath you, but team, project, mission, all of it sounds absolutely awesome. So I do think you guys will, you're probably going to go all the way, which I'll be closely monitoring. What I wanted to finish with today was a couple of lessons for people in the space, and you've done a lot of different things for a lot of different companies. One question we do get asked a lot is first time CEOs, or that have previously been CEOs and exited a business or left, when they're on that sort of debating scale of, do I look at chair seats? What did you gain from it that made you ultimately want to proactively look for more chair seats and be more active with other companies?
Well, I mean, I think for me, I was, I have it's not unique, but it is infrequent that someone has an American background who's been in Europe for many years, has grown European startups and businesses, successfully taken them to the US through large clinical trials, and through the FDA and commercialization. That kind of transatlantic um, experience and the ability to work deeply with and fruitfully with European investors is something that's not common, I would say. And that's what brought me to chairman roles. And I was really looking for the chance to work with and mentor a couple CEOs who I could be involved, right? But respectful of them running the company, right? Because they've got their job to do. I've done that. I do that job. I've done that job. You don't need your chairman breathing down your neck, but you do need a partner who can help you understand what you should be doing, and maybe even more importantly, what you should not be doing, right? Because there are lots of mistakes to be made. I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm happy to make sure that they don't make those mistakes, right? I should be the only one who has to learn from them, right? I mean, we're experience making the mistakes. I can say, "Oh, don't do that. Think about this over here because that looks like it would work, but it doesn't work. You got to do this. Hey, with the FDA, you got to think about this. Your timelines are likely to look like this as much as you would wish they look like this. They look like this. You know, running a U.S. clinical trial. Have you thought about this, and this, which are not intuitive things to think about, but they are critical to success. So I wanted to be of use, right? And really also just get a chance to touch other technologies on a regular basis. Sometimes working at a single company, right, all the time with a single technology, it can feel a little claustrophobic, honestly, because you're just thinking about that one thing all the time. And the ability to get outside of that, have ideas and interactions about other things helps you with coming back with joy every day to the thing that you're spending the vast majority of your time on. So if people want to do it, it's great. I think start if you haven't sat on boards or other boards, I would start there. I had done that previously and then think about chairman, but it also takes time. So you have to be willing to you know, do the chairman stuff in your free time, which may mean during office hours, but it extends your extends your other hours for your CEO role, right? Which is effectively infinite. I mean, the CEO role, like you never Saturdays, Sundays, I mean, if you like see work as work, then it's not the job for you. If you're thinking about things on Sunday morning and you just feel like, "Oh, I'm gonna go up to my office and work for a few hours because if I don't get it off my plate, I'm not gonna be happy." I think you have to have that mentality because it's, uh, it's not a 9 to 5, and it's not even an 8 to 8 job, right? It's a deeply, deeply, fully invested physical and emotional journey, right?
Way more than that, exactly that. And there's something that I really like about you, and it was unearthed even before our discovery call. Really, I spoke to a CEO that said she often reaches out to you for advice, and you mentioned that you've also done the same. You reach out to people for advice, you give advice, and I think a lot of CEOs are afraid to do that and afraid to make that call. Like, do you actively, tell people that they should be doing this more?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm involved with a couple different groups of CEOs, but also I mean, I've met a bunch of CEOs over the years going to all the meetings and such. And if I think one of the people that I know has been through something I'm trying to do, I call them. Why would I not? Right. And I don't need hours of their time, but I'm like, hey, I've got this. I'm going to be doing that. Have you done that before? Like, have you seen this? And you know what? We're all in the trenches together. We're slightly different trenches, but they're all parts of the same battle, right? And people are always willing to help. You never, I mean, it's okay if someone it doesn't want to help, they won't take your call. But what's 15 minutes, half an hour to talk through something with somebody else who is frankly in a pretty lonely role. I mean, the CEO role is a lonely role. You can't talk to anybody else in your team about everything. And ultimately people look to you to, be very knowledgeable and make decisions. And that means going out and gathering data from outside your organization. So it is a club. We all go through many of the same emotional journeys, intellectual journeys, professional journeys. And so I would really encourage people to nurture those relationships. I just proactively reached out to somebody yesterday whose company isn't working out, or it was a few days ago, and said, "Hey, look, when you're ready for the next thing, give me a call because we've worked together. I know you're awesome. If I can help go forward with something, absolutely, I want to do that." And so it's a bit like a family where you should not be alone.
Yeah. And let's give me I want to give you one more final question. You've actually just touched on that topic. There's going to be a lot of scientific founders, CEOs, executives right now that have got 12 months of road left. They're probably looking at a pretty daunting task. What's the one conversation that they should have this week?
Oh, um,
It's a tough one
uh,
to think about. That burn rate's a scary
tell your
topic.
partner, tell your wife that you're going to be complaining a lot, and to be very patient with you, and to realize it's not about them. I
It's
think you
not
got
personal at all.
Yeah, it's really hard to like, my office is upstairs in our house, and I
Yeah.
will go downstairs, and it's really hard not to carry your professional burden downstairs, and your lack of sleep and all the things that go along with that situation, because it's not easy. And like when you see these super successful big things, I mean, uh, they came with a huge amount of stress. I mean, when we closed the transaction with Inari, we had 7 days of cash in the bank.
Yeah. Wow.
So,
I did not know
like,
that.
now we had a bridge that we could pull on, and so,
Yep.
but, you know, it is never done until it's done, and it is going to be high stress again and again and again and again. So, if you have a partner, and I have a amazing, my wife is amazing, support structure, and sounding board, and sometimes the sounding board is a silent one who just listens to you complain. But if you do nurture that person, because like, I mean, you just have to know that you're not gonna be a perfect, you can't just, like, go through all this and then be like, or maybe somebody can, I can't, and then just walk out and be like, "Oh, great, everything's good," like, it doesn't work like that. So, nurture your home, and your private stuff, because if that needs to be a refuge from the professional stuff.
That's a great bit of advice, and shout out to Mrs. Rose, the investors in the E2 team. A lot of you have had a lot of praise from this podcast, but look, it's been an absolutely awesome episode today. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and showing some insights, and yeah, I really truly hope you guys make it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk, and yeah, have a great day.
You too, Dan. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Crux of Cardio. If there's one thing this space has taught me, both personally and professionally, it's that progress in cardiovascular care is never the result of one individual. It's built by ecosystems, by teams, by people willing to take the long bets on hard problems. At Crux, our mission is to support that ecosystem through talent, capital, and community. The podcast is one small part of that effort, a place to share the real stories from people shaping the future of cardiovascular care. If you found value in today's conversation, I would love for you to follow the show and share it with someone building in this space. And if you're a founder, operator, or investor working on something meaningful in the cardiovascular care space, we'd love to hear from you.